I found a note. What happened next terrified me. The house was beautiful, undeniably so. A Victorian, all gables and gingerbread trim, standing a little taller and prouder than its neighbours on Hemlock Street. It was also unsettling. I couldn't quite put my finger on it when I first saw it online, but the feeling intensified the moment I stepped inside. Mark, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as my overactive imagination. It's old, Sarah. Old houses have quirks. He was probably right. I'd moved to this city for the remote job, desperate for a fresh start after everything. Mark was still tied to the old place, commuting on weekends, which meant I was alone in this grand, creaky old house most of the time. The isolation didn't help. It started small. A floorboard that seemed to creak even when I wasn't near it. A shadow flickering in the corner of my eye. The house settling, I told myself. Then came the note. I was replacing a particularly loose floorboard in the hallway, one that had been driving me insane with its incessant squeaking. Underneath, tucked into the dusty space between the joists, was a folded piece of paper. Yellowed with age, the paper crackled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was spidery and faded. It read, "They see. Behind the veil, don't trust the roses," she whispers, always watching. Goosebumps prickled my skin. I read it again and then again. It sounded like something out of a bad Gothic novel. Ridiculous. Probably just some old joke, I muttered, stuffing the note into my pocket. But the seed was planted. The next day, I tried to research the house. The city archives were frustratingly vague. Residents of the Ainsworth family, early 1900s. Subsequent owners, details unavailable. There were whispers online, though. Local forums talked about trouble at the Hemlock Street house, about unexplained events. People who lived nearby for years who felt its strange vibes. That night I woke up to a noise, a soft thumping like someone gently knocking on the wall. Mark wasn't there. He was working a late shift. I lay in bed, heart pounding, listening. It stopped. Then it started again. Closer this time, like it was coming from inside the room. I grabbed my phone, fumbling for the flashlight app. I swept the beam across the room, finding nothing but shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I told myself it was the wind. The old house settling, my imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next day, an elderly woman approached me while I was tending the small garden in the front yard. She introduced herself as Mrs. Olson, my neighbour from across the street. She had a kind face, but her eyes held a strange intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Lovely house," she said, her voice raspy. "But it has a history, you know." "I've heard," I replied cautiously. "Oh, yes," she continued, leaning closer. "Terrible things happened there, years ago. Best to be careful, dear. Very careful." "What kind of terrible things?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, her gaze darting around nervously. Best not to dwell on it. Some things are best left buried. Then she smiled, a thin, unsettling smile. "Just don't trust the roses." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there feeling cold despite the warm sunshine. The roses. The note. Mrs. Olson's cryptic warning. It was all starting to feel connected. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every groan of the house sent shivers down my spine. I started documenting everything. The strange noises, the shadows, the feelings of unease. I wanted to have proof, something concrete to show Mark when he came back. Then the roses started appearing. The first one was on my doorstep, a single, blood-red rose lying on the welcome mat. I threw it away, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then another one appeared, this time in my garden, planted neatly next to my wilting petunias, and then another on my car windshield. The phone calls started a few days later. The caller ID was always blocked. When I answered, there was only static, followed by a distorted, raspy voice. It would whisper fragmented phrases, snippets from the note. "Behind the veil, always watching, don't trust." I hung up each time, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to trace the calls, but it was no use. They were untraceable. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Fleeting figures in reflections, shadows that lingered too long. Once I swore I saw a face in the window of the upstairs bedroom, a pale, gaunt face with dark eyes. But when I turned to look directly, it was gone. Mark grew increasingly concerned. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at every sound. "Sarah, you're scaring yourself," he said, holding my hands. "This house is just getting to you. We can move if you want." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I can't run." I need to figure this out. But I was starting to doubt my own sanity. Was I imagining things? Was the isolation and stress finally getting to me? Then came the delivery driver. I ordered groceries online, trying to avoid going out. When the driver arrived, he was young, maybe early 20s, with a nervous demeanor. As he handed me the bags, he leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. "They don't like new people here," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "Be careful." Then he turned and hurried back to his truck, leaving me standing there, frozen in place. That night, I had a full-blown panic attack. I was in the kitchen making tea when I saw it. A figure standing in the hallway, just outside the doorway. It was tall and shadowy, its features indistinct, but I could feel its presence, its malevolence. I screamed and dropped the kettle, hot water splashing on my feet. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching me. I ran, stumbling through the house, locking myself in the bedroom. I called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. Detective Harding arrived an hour later. He was a weary-looking man with tired eyes. He listened to my story, his expression impassive. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset," he said after I finished. "But there's no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being here." "But I saw it," I insisted. "I saw the figure, and the phone calls, the roses." He sighed. "Ma'am, I think you're just under a lot of stress. This is an old house, it makes noises, and people get prank calls all the time." He took a report, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He thought I was crazy. I felt utterly alone. Driven to desperation, I decided to confront Mrs. Olsen. She had to know something. She was the only one who seemed to understand what was happening. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. She answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I need to know," I said, my voice trembling. "What's going on in that house? What happened there?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. Her house was cluttered and smelled of dust and mothballs. She led me into the living room, where shadows danced in the corners. "The house, it's always been troubled," she began, her voice low. "A terrible tragedy happened there years ago. A young woman. She was murdered. They never found the killer." "But what does that have to do with me?" I asked. "Her spirit, it's still there," Mrs. Olsen said, her eyes fixed on something behind me. "She's trapped, and she doesn't like having strangers in her home." "You're saying the house is haunted?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's more than that," she said, her voice rising. "There's something darker, connected to the land itself, an entity that feeds on fear and sorrow." She stood up abruptly, her eyes wild. "You need to leave, dear. You need to leave now, before it's too late." "But what about you?" I asked. "I'm too old to run," she said, a strange smile spreading across her face. "But you can still save yourself." Her demeanor changed. She started speaking in a strange, chanting tone, her eyes glazed over. She sounded like a completely different person. I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I turned to leave, but the door was locked. I tried the windows, but they were all sealed shut. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding on the door. Mrs. Olsen just stared at me, her eyes filled with a chilling, unnatural light. "It's too late," she whispered. "It's already inside you." I ran, scrambling to find another exit. But the house seemed to be changing, the layout shifting. Hallways stretched and twisted, leading nowhere. Doors disappeared and windows became brick walls. I was trapped. I heard a noise behind me, a soft rustling sound. I turned and saw a shadow moving in the corner of the room. It grew larger, more defined, until it took the shape of a figure. The same figure I had seen in the hallway, the same face I had glimpsed in the window. It was coming for me. I screamed and ran again, the figure pursuing me through the ever-changing corridors of Mrs. Olsen's house. I felt a cold breath on my neck, a whisper in my ear. "Welcome home." Somehow I managed to find a window that wasn't sealed. I smashed it with a chair, shattering the glass and clawing my way out. I stumbled onto the street, gasping for air, my hands bleeding. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mark's number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. Finally, it went to voicemail. "Mark, please," I sobbed into the phone. "I need help. I'm at Mrs. Olsen's house. Something's wrong. Please come get me." The call cut out. No signal. I looked around. The street was deserted. All the houses were dark, their windows like empty eyes. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been abandoned. I turned and looked back at my house, the Victorian on Hemlock Street. A figure stood in the window on the second floor. It was tall and shadowy, its features distorted, and it was holding something in its hand, a single blood-red rose. Then I heard the voice again, the distorted, raspy voice from the phone. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome home," it whispered.